And we're here because we know that the Ocean Drive project behind me is very complex. And it's been going on for many months, and we understand it, but we're not sure if the community does. And so we thought it'd be good to come out today to provide about a midway, or actually probably about a 3/4 of a way into the project, to explain it a little bit and make sure the community knows what's going on and what's coming in the coming months to finish the project. So what we know is Ocean Drive behind me from Ennis-Jocelyn to I-37 is a 12-mile stretch, a 14-mile stretch. 14-mile stretch of probably the best scenic view in the city of Corpus Christi. Now, it was built in about 1950, and since that time, very little has been done to it. There was an overlay done, I think, in the 80s, and except for that, not much maintenance was done. And so what we had, I think a lot of us maybe have forgotten by now, but what we had was a terrible roadway with very rough driving conditions and very ugly. It did not represent our city well. And so at the request of many council members and the mayor, we looked for a strategy to be able to repair it, and we looked for funding. We were able to pull together $12 million to be able to address the street. And what that is the $12 million is doing what we call a very deep reclamation and then an overlay. And so a street that could be as bad as Ocean Drive was, oftentimes could use a full rebuild, where you take the asphalt off, you take the base out, and you redo everything. And then since you're that exposed, you might as well replace all the pipes underneath and the electrical conduit and all that. So that turns into a very expensive proposition. So the $12 million project would have been fivefold had we done that in-depth of a reclamation project. So what we opted to do instead was what we call a mill and overlay, but the milling, taking up the old surface, was a deep mill. So we went almost down to the subgrade and took out all that old infrastructure and are putting in 2 layers of asphalt. One you can see right behind me, the lighter black-gray color. And then if you look at the southbound lane, it's a little bit of a darker color, right? Can you notice that? So that one is complete, going southbound. That has had 2 layers of asphalt and some base repair that has been done. And that's the plan for this entire project. What we see going north, this lane immediately behind me, is step 1 of the process. And so Harsh-Anderson, who's here with us, Randall and Drew, contract partners, they're the ones that are doing the project, but they have on this north side taken up the old asphalt and have made base repairs in certain areas and have put layer 1 of a 2-layer street onto the roadway heading northbound. What has to happen next is, as we continue to repair areas of the base and put corrective action on some of this northbound first layer, once that's complete, then we'll come back, or Harsh-Anderson will, and put a final layer on top, stretching from, Airline all the way to Louisiana, right? So Airline to Ennis-Jocelyn is complete now. It's been complete for many months using that same methodology. So that's important to note. So some drivers are experiencing or seeing some premature failures, but that is in the phase 1 process. And what we discovered, or what Harsh-Anderson discovered, is that as they excavated the road layer that was built in 1950 and really not much improved, the sub-base below the layer, the street, is really not the most optimal. In fact, in some sections, it's made with crushed oyster shells and other materials that was widely used in the 50s and prior in our city of Corpus Christi. So when they found that, they have been replacing that with a more structurally sound base, but in some areas it's undetectable until the layers placed on and excessive driving is going over it. So this is a natural part of the business process of replacing a road like this. And so the failures that you may be seeing along this northern section are being replaced as part of the project. A key thing to know is that the northbound lane is not done. It is in progress, still in progress. The southbound lane, the darker one behind me, that's just about done. I think they still have to stripe it, but you can see it's real smooth. And it's been done both on the two layers, the bottom layer and the top layer. So this project, which is really a monumental effort for the city, it replaces legacy problems that we have had, which is inattentiveness to our streets and accepting the unacceptable. We began this project, we actually dubbed it Revive the Drive, and it's going well. We wanted to explain what the drivers might be seeing today and what's coming up. So as the base is being repaired here on the northbound lane, they'll come in with a final lift soon, and it'll be nice and smooth like the second lane you can see behind me over there, the southbound lane. That work is going to take up to springtime, maybe a little bit into spring. And then what's going on at the same time is another contractor is taking Ocean Drive from I-37 to about the Cole Park Pier area just before that hill to, I think, Buford, because that area was, the stretch between Cole Park has already been repaired. So their work is starting, but it'll take through the early part of the summer for them to finish. So the plan is we hope that by the summertime, early summer, the entire 14-mile stretch will be completely rehabilitated with a deep reclamation and then a milling and overlaying of that street. So that's important to note. Look, I want to just remind the community that this city council and myself and the team that we've assembled here in the past 3 years are focused more than ever on streets. We know that that is priority number one for the community. In the past 3 budgets, we have allocated over $430 million in streets. $430 million. We didn't have a chance to check this morning, but I would submit that that's probably more than a couple of decades worth of funding, right? I see some of my staff shaking their head. So in 3 years, we budgeted and we're executing on over $430 million in streets for our community. What the community needs to understand, I think they do, is that after decades of neglect, decades of not improving our streets, decades of not having a robust public works department or even a strategy, it's going to take us some time to get out of this. And so we're working as hard as we can. Our crews, you might have noticed, are actually working on the weekends since about a couple of weeks ago addressing the pothole situation. And that pothole situation is another good example of decades of neglect. And so when you don't address your streets in a timely manner, you don't maintain them properly, after decades of doing that, you run into the trouble that we're in as a city. So even with the $430 million in the past 3 years, there's still a long way to go. It's going to take us some time to dig out of it, so to speak. But we're investing in it. A couple things we've done in the city, in addition to putting dollars to the issue, is for the first time in many years, we have a public works department. And so we have a team or teams of professionals who are self-performing street maintenance. The city didn't have that 3 years ago. We weren't self-performing, we weren't doing any work. We have retrained all our staff, we've reassembled the public works team, we've filled positions. City Council has authorized millions in very expensive equipment so that the city can, what we call self-perform, meaning we can rebuild streets ourselves. We don't have to rely 100% on the private sector. What that does for us is it brings down the price. The city isn't in the street rebuilding process like the private sector rightly is to make a profit. We're in there to get the work done. And so we can do it a little bit cheaper and still with high quality. So for the first time in a long time, I would submit, the city's self-performing, and we're doing that every day. To be able to do that, we have a plan. For the first time ever in the city's history, we have a 5-year street infrastructure maintenance program plan, meaning that for 5 years from now to 5 years out, we know exactly what streets in our neighborhoods are going to be repaved. We didn't have that before. And that's the first for our city. And so every new year that comes up, we add a new 5th year onto the plan. And so our community knows in a very transparent way, this plan is on our website, when their street will get done, or is their street going to get done this year or next year. So we have a transparent plan. We're self-performing. We're also still relying on our private sector partners, like Haas Anderson, who's here with us today, both Randall and Drew with the company. We know that even if we self-perform, we can't do it alone. We can't do it by ourselves. We rely on our private sector partners, and so that's great, and that has always been great. But one thing we're doing a little different is making sure we're holding them accountable to the standards that we expect them to deliver. And our team knows that. They know to stay engaged with them as their work's being performed. We're watching it. I'm watching it. I've even called Daryl up myself one time, or I'm sorry, Randall. Actually, I called Daryl and Randall up, the owners of Haas Anderson. They didn't like the phone call, but we talked a few things over, and that's all about being accountable, right, to the customer, which is us, the city. So our private sector partners are with us. They're working great. We need them. We continue to work with them. We're making sure we work with them so they understand what we're expecting as they do their work. And then finally, I talked about those decades of neglect, and part of that is that when we built streets in our new subdivision for many decades, they weren't built as strong as they could be. The design standards, as they called them, were weak, very weak. And so you all have seen it. What we see in brand new subdivisions, a few years into them being complete, is failures in the streets, potholes, rutting, undulation, which is unacceptable. That stops March 1. We worked with City Council to redevelop or rewrite our development standard guidelines. One item that used to be able to be used is this stuff here, a geomat they call it, a geogrid or geomat. It's something you may see in your kid's toy closet. But this is used sometimes to provide structural integrity to a new road. And that's great if the soil conditions are favorable for it. But in many of our city areas, the soil conditions are not favorable to just put down a plastic mat and think that that's going to cut it. And so the new design standards that go into effect March 1, just a few weeks from now, will require that developers, when they build these new subdivision roads, they stabilize the soil. They either bring in better soil or they use chemicals, a lime stabilizer, to treat that soil if it's very elastic or very plastic or very movable when it rains, when water gets into it. And so making sure that our design standards are, like most other Texas cities, strong and robust, making sure that is in place will help to preserve our new roads that are being built by the private sector in those subdivisions. Then the city can focus more on those older inner city roads that also have been neglected for decades. So we have many strategies in place, as we've just talked about, to improve our streets. Not only millions and millions more than the city has ever budgeted. We have crews for the first time in many years in our city that are doing street work and doing a great job at it. We have our private sector partners like Haas Anderson that continue to perform well, but we're communicating more with them. And then we have new design standards so that new streets last more than 2 and 3 years. They need to last 30 years. So with that, we want to see if there's any questions from the media or the community that may be here. Any questions? Let me see if Randall, you want to say anything? Yes, sir.
Put me on the spot?
Yeah.
No, I just appreciate your approach. Just want to second everything you have to say. We agree with the changes you're making and increasing the standards, and I think that's a really good path forward. We appreciate the partnership with the city and the opportunity to be your contractor.
Right. Thank you. That was Randall from Haas Anderson, and it's a firm that it's a local firm. They've been in our area for many decades, and they're doing a great job. As I opened up our briefing today, I said that this project is very complex, and it is. And companies like Haas Anderson, just like the city, have to be nimble and have to adjust what they thought was going to be their work day for that day because of some unforeseen conditions. And so they've done a great job responding to a lot of conditions that we didn't think we'd have here on Ocean Drive. Ultimately, we're going to have a beautiful roadway, one that replaces one that I think we were all pretty ashamed of, to one that we're going to be very proud of, to have our residents or our tourists drive down, see our beautiful bay, as well as the beautiful real estate that lines the street. So I thank you for coming out today. Unless there's any questions, we'll conclude the briefing. Thank you.